We are. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Solution Spotlight. Just going to give it maybe one more minute for people to filter in. Um, as Kitces always says, don't know why it's just like a actual waiting room and they're filtering in one by one, but that's where we're at today. So, all right.
Hey everybody, thanks for coming today. Excited to talk to you a little bit more.
Yeah. Abby even brought out her special big gun microphone, as you can see. She was just talking about that while we were catching up before this webinar. So I feel very honored that we have that special technology out. Cool. Well, it is 11:02 my time, so I am going to kick us off. Welcome to today's Solution Spotlight, Ditch Traditional Planning for a Scalable Advice Model. Joining us today are Abby Morton, the head of customer success at Elements, and Tim Iseler, financial advisor and founder of Iseler Financial. So XYPN and the Elements platform have created a strategic partnership to enhance the advisors and clients' financial planning experience. By integrating Element's intuitive client management and engagement tools with XYPN's resources and community support, this collaboration empowers financial planners to streamline their operations and deliver personalized, efficient service. Together, they are committed to fostering innovation in the financial planning industry, enabling advisors to focus on what they do best, which is helping clients achieve their financial goals. So let's meet Abby and Tim today. Abby, as I mentioned, is the head of customer success at Elements, bringing over 14 years of experience in the financial services industry. Prior to joining Elements, Abby worked at Goldman Sachs and Dentist Advisors, honing her skills in financial planning and client service. As a CFP professional, Abby leads the customer success team, ensuring advisors have the support and the resources to effectively implement Elements in their practice. She is passionate about empowering advisors to streamline their planning process and deliver a world-class client experience. Abby frequently shares her insights on the Elementary podcast, discussing best practices for defining and communicating client financial health. She is committed to helping advisors leverage technology to build a more efficient, profitable, and impactful business. Abby also currently resides in Salt Lake City with her husband and two children. And Tim is a financial advisor and founder of Iseler Financial. And he is passionate about keeping money simple and accessible for his clients. With a background in music and years of experience navigating the complexities of professional and personal finance, more personal finance, Tim brings a unique perspective to his advisory practice. His approach is rooted in helping clients achieve clarity and control over their finances without the overwhelm. And as a dedicated user of Elements Financial Vitals, Tim leverages this innovative system to deliver quick, insightful financial assessments that empower his clients to make smart financial decisions with confidence. All right, just a couple of housekeeping items for you today. There is the chat tab and the Q&A tab at the bottom of this webinar panel, I suppose. You can upvote questions in that Q&A tab, and I encourage that you do, just so that we can accommodate and answer those questions that are most popular first. But if you but also just drop your questions as they come up, and Abby is going to answer them along with Tim during the presentation. And then some upcoming events on the XYPN side. Tomorrow, September 25th, be sure to join us for the Learn to Launch office hours with our XYPN success strategists. And I will drop the link down below so that you can register. And then October 1st is another solution spotlight, strategic automation and CRM with Wealthbox and Sphinx automation. And I will also drop that link too. Last but not least, as you may have seen while you were hanging out in the waiting room, XYPN Live is coming up in less than a month, which is wild to think about. So October 15th to the 17th in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Tickets are $599 for XYPN members and $699 for non-members. And as you guessed it, I will drop that registration link down below too. All right, that is enough for me. Abby, Tim, I will turn over to you. Thanks.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks everyone for being here today. Tim and I are really excited to share a little bit more about this new partnership that we've started with XYPN. So, as Sarah said, I work at Elements. I'm the director of customer success, and working at Elements for over 3 years. This was a partnership that we were so excited to finally be able to kick off the ground. So I just wanted to start high level so that you guys could understand a little bit more about the partnership between Elements and XYPN together. What benefits do you guys get being XYPN customers? These are unique benefits only to XYPN. We actually don't have any other partnership that is quite as beneficial to you as this particular partnership. So I'm actually going to take a second and share my screen to show you the landing page. If you want to sign up for our platform, you can just go to this unique landing page, share screen. Here we go. You can go to this landing page, getelements.com/XYPN. I can put it in the chat. You just go XYPN right there. This will come up. And really what I want to draw your attention to is the pricing page. So for those, really our partnership is built for those advisors who are just starting their practices and building it up over time. So those of you who are just starting out and you have 0 to 5 clients, you can actually use Elements for free. It's 100% discount. After you get your 6th client, you kind of move into this next accelerate mode, which is $149 a month. And then 21 plus clients moves up. Now, these are clients that you have in your practice, not necessarily clients in Elements. We are really trying to, like I said, help advisors who are just starting out to get going. And as you build and scale with your practice, you can build and scale with Elements as well. The other great thing about this is it is a month-to-month contract, so you can cancel at any time. So it's really easy to get started and get going and try it out. And so I just wanted you to know about that benefit. One other benefit that we have is we do a monthly office hours. It's an hour long. We have Michael Reynolds, who's one of the XYPN members as well as Elements users. He runs that. It's the first Wednesday of every month. I think if you go to your like support, or not support, but like your forums, the community, is that what it's called, Tim? The community in XYPN?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you go to the community, there's a specific like Elements page. All the details for this will be listed in there. But when you go there, it's just the first Wednesday of every month. So Michael comes on to answer any questions that you have about it. But that's also what we're doing today is we brought Tim on to talk more specifically about how do you use Elements like in real life. Elements is a new tool. It's a new way of thinking. It's a new way to do financial planning. And so a lot of people say, you know, how do I use this tool? It's a little different than what I'm used to in eMoney and Right Capital and even Money Guide Pro. So we just thought it would be helpful to have Tim come on and talk about like how do you use it in real life. So with that, I'm going to transition to Tim. Any questions that you guys have, please put them into the chat. I will be monitoring the chat. We want to make this as interactive as possible. So please feel free to put anything in the chat and I will ask the question to Tim.
All right, cool. Well, hi, everybody. My name's Tim. I do run my own solo firm. I'm an XYPN member, and I'm also an Elements user. And as was mentioned, I'm a career changer. So I worked in the music business for 18 years before starting my own RIA. And I think why that's relevant to today's conversation is that I didn't come in to the business with a lot of preconceived ideas about what a financial plan is or should be. So when I launched, like most XYPN members, probably I started using Right Capital because it was the free option. And I just sort of did what it seemed like you were supposed to do. And what I found was that there were some things that worked really well with clients with Right Capital, but overall, like a lot of the stuff that I was excited about got no reaction and maybe made clients a little bit more confused. And so I felt like I was sort of struggling to fit the service to my clients rather than finding a better service for my clients, if that makes sense. And so when I heard about Elements, it seemed to make a lot of sense because visually it's very attractive, but it's also really, really easy to just see the scores, understand what they mean, and get a quick picture of your financial health, what's going well, what's not going well, what are things that maybe you didn't even consider that now you should consider. And when I introduced it to my practice, I really, really quickly saw how I could use it as the first thing, the first piece of tech that my clients interact with, um, which is what I do, and I use Elements as sort of a springboard to, number one, start conversations with clients or with prospects, and number two, tell me when I need to pull out the big guns. Like if somebody's 35, I don't need to run a retirement report because they're not there. It's not ready. It's not relevant. So I don't need to pull out those big tools for every single client the way that I might with a Right Capital or an eMoney. With Elements, I can at a glance look and see like, oh, maybe this person actually is in a position where they're close to retirement, and then that tells me I need to dig a little deeper. So today what I thought, rather than giving you a long presentation or just a demo of the product, I thought I'd share a few case studies. The names are made up, but these are actually scorecards, the initial scorecards that prospects and clients brought to me. So I want to just share them with you, share some of my observations and how I use it in my practice. But I also want to, I see the real value that I can provide in answering your questions and how does Elements actually get used by people in the wild. So the presentation part for me is going to be pretty short, and I'm hoping that most of the webinar can be in response to your questions and more of an interaction. So with that, I'll jump in. I'm going to share a few pages, a few sample scorecards. Okay, so this is actually the initial scorecard. The names are not correct, but the ages and the situation are, this is the initial scorecard from a prospect who did become a client. They're an older couple. I don't work with a lot of retirees and pre-retirees, but these two seem to fit really well with me. And their number one concern was, they're still working, they're happy still working, but one is 68, one is 65. At some point, that's just not going to be viable. Are they okay? That's sort of the number one thing. Like, are we okay? And this couple also, throughout their whole lives, didn't really pay that much attention to money. So they don't really have an orientation around, are they doing the right things? So what I want to share initially is just kind of an overview. When somebody gives me a new scorecard, I kind of don't pay attention to these first two on the top very much at all. Those are ones that typically we have to dig a little deeper before people understand what they are. And so almost nobody figures that out right off the bat. This second row is all cash flow. And all of these metrics are figured out by the amount of the relevant topic divided by income. So I can see these two aren't saving anything, which is, not awesome. They're spending most of their money. They don't have very much debt. And at this point, when they've talked to me for the first time, they haven't shared any tax returns. So that's not weird. But I'm just sort of explaining like how I get oriented around this. This last row is how different asset classes relate to their annual spending. So right here, liquid term means they're liquid assets. It says zero, which means they're liquid assets. They have listed zero liquid assets. And what that tells me is just that the information's incomplete, which is not a deal breaker. It's just a point to file away like, hey, looks like something is missing. They have qualified term refers to pre-tax accounts like 401ks, IRAs, things like that. They have some, not a lot, not awesome. But then this card in particular is extremely interesting to me because that score of 25.8 means their real estate can support them based on their current estimated spending for about 25 years. And I happen to know one of the reasons this couple was reaching out is they were about to sell an income property for about half of that total. So I know that they're going to shift with a score of 25, they're going to shift about, 12 and a half of that over to liquid term as soon as the house sells, as soon as the income property sells. And then this last score here, total term, that's all of their net worth divided by their spending. And to me, this is a really positive indication that even though a lot of their scores aren't great, they're actually doing pretty well. Because what this tells me is their net worth can support them for a little over 30 years. And if you look at their ages, a little over 30 years is life expectancy. It's probably beyond life expectancy. And I know that they're going to shift a ton of money from real estate into cash right away, which they did. And so that's what this scorecard tells me. And the reason it's useful is when I started my first meeting with them, and their number one thing is, hey, we don't even know if we can retire. Is this even possible? I can point this out to them and say, explain this total term score. I don't need any more information from them, really. I can just explain this total term score. This tells me your net worth could support you for about 25 years. I know that, or excuse me, about 31 years. I know that you're about to turn half of that into cash, which we can invest. And that gives me a lot of confidence that they're actually pretty well positioned. Throughout our conversation, they also mentioned that they're interested in downsizing their primary residence, which would free up probably another $500,000. So just at a glance, with getting very, very cursory information without really digging into their tax return or making sure that, is everything totally bulletproof accurate, I can have a conversation with them that says like, okay, you're in the ballpark. Now we just need to figure out how to take that cash and turn it into what you need. Um, and
Uh,
and being able to talk to a prospect who's never met me before and immediately give them a conversation, like have a conversation with them that says, not only are you probably going to be okay, but you're in pretty good shape now, and I will help you figure out how to stretch the money that you bring in from that rental property. I will help you stretch that so that it really does last you another 30 years. Um, and as I mentioned, neither of these two are actually finished working at this point, so they're actually going to keep earning income for several more years. So that's one example of how I used elements. This is an actual scorecard with some pre-retirees. I used elements in the first meeting to explain their situation, help them feel better about their situation, and help them see how working with me would help them get to where they wanted to go.
I love this. I think this is such a great example, Tim. I'm so glad you shared this. I wanted to just take a quick step back for 2 seconds. I think talking through this example helps you really quickly illustrate how Elements is different, I think, from other tools, right? The title of this webinar today is Ditch Traditional Planning, right, for a Scalable Advice Model. And I just wanted to reiterate, this is how Elements is helping advisors do that every single day. Somebody asked in the chat, actually, Alina asked in the chat, did they input the initial data for the scorecard to appear and get all this information in right away? And I'm going to answer that for Tim is yes, they go through an onboarding flow. The client puts in all of this information. So Tim alluded to their tax rate is 0. You'll see like the equity rate, the savings rate, the liquid term, all of those ones on the far left side are all 0. And that's because the client is not going to like fill it out 100% accurate every single time on the first go around. But Tim is still able to take the data that they did put it in the system and quickly add value without having to go through and get tax returns and get every bank statement from them and get, all the data from all the information about their children and their family, right? And wills and estates and trusts and everything that I know that we eventually need to get as advisors. he can still add value with the minimal data and like their best effort right off of the get-go. And I think that is with this scorecard, how Elements is quickly adding value and how it's saving you time as advisors is Tim could go into this meeting with having spent 5 minutes reviewing the information here, have the conversation, and Elmo and Alma could decide that they don't want to move forward with Tim. But then he didn't spend 5 hours, putting a plan together for someone who like didn't want to move forward. But if they do want to move forward, then he will continue to like fill out that information and continue to like build out the scorecard and add in all that additional information. So I just wanted to go back high level and help you understand like that's how Elements is different.
Totally, totally. And to underscore a couple of things, I think unless you're a superstar planner where people are lining up, you've got a wait list a year long. I've never experienced anybody who's excited to give me their tax return the very first time we ever meet, right? So the fact that somebody doesn't give me their tax information on a first meeting, I don't care. It's not important to me. The fact that they haven't shared what kind of investments they have, I don't care. I don't need that to have a conversation. It's nice to know what's the dollar amount associated with their investment account. So if I go down here to qualified term, I click on this. Oh, they have 700K and a 401k. Like that's useful to know. But for a first meeting, I don't care what funds they have. That doesn't matter to me. And I don't want that to be a barrier to being able to, number one, have a conversation, and number two, demonstrate why they need someone like me to help them.
Yeah, great. Hey, Tim, we have a question that came in from Jamie. He says, do you calculate the distribution rate they will need based on the burn rate?
Yes, exactly right. So the burn rate, well, Elements, let me just say this, Elements is not a predictive or projective tool. It doesn't say, so they're age 65 and 68. It doesn't say when you're, 70 and 73, how much money will you spend? Because who knows? Maybe it's less than now, maybe it's more than now. Who knows? I don't know. What it does is it takes, here's what you're doing now. Here's a snapshot of your health now, based on your current situation. Here's a frame of reference for how long you could live off of your retirement accounts based on right now. And one of the reasons I like that is because not everybody wants the the forward looking, the projective. Not everybody wants that initially. And everybody always initially wants to feel good about what's happening right now. So telling them right now, this is your score, total term, 31 and a half years. That's what that means, 31 and a half years. That means something to them in a way we're saying, like, what's your rate of distribution in retirement, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully this answers the question, which is that any assumptions you make are based on what's happening right now. And if I meet with this client, a year from now, 2 years from now, and they say, hey, we're spending a little more than we used to, that's going to tweak all of those things. And the reason I don't think you're missing out by not having that projection is I feel like it's my job. They just freed up from this real estate. They freed up about $1.7 million. It's my job to make that $1.7 million work for them. And I don't think it matters that how I make that work for them is not necessarily in this scorecard. It's totally fine if that's a supplemental document that I provide to them that says, hey, here's how your money's invested. Here's what I anticipate as an average annual rate of return. That's fine. It doesn't need to be on this platform, in my opinion, in order to have good conversations and in order to know where do I need to focus my attention.
Yeah. I love that. One other way I'd answer that question too is, Tim, can you click on your total term box right there? So another way I'd answer that is, as Tim mentioned earlier, that whole bottom row is using their spending to calculate how many years they can live off of, in this case, their net worth. Or in the orange box's case, it'd be off just their liquid assets or just off their retirement assets. So in a sense, we are using what they spend right now to understand, if you keep living that same way, this is in how many years you can live off of those assets. And that's the whole entire bottom row is doing that as well. So that's great. One other question, Tim, before we go on is, can you expand on how you use elements with prospects? Does the prospect enter the data as well?
Yeah, great. I would say that this has come up different times in different conversations I've had. I try to get everyone I interact with who seems like they might be interested in working with me to do a scorecard, whether that's a lead. I do have a link on my website. I have a landing page on my website where a lead who's never met me before can do it. If it's a prospect, if they've scheduled a call with me, I'll include a link like, hey, before our call, can you please, fill this out? It'll take about 5 minutes. It'll help us have a better conversation. But I don't let that be a barrier. So sometimes the first time a person interacts with Elements is after they've already become a client, already signed the agreement, already, whatever, started paying me. That might be the first time they start using Elements. And what I would say is at every stage of your funnel, I think of Elements as a way to keep the conversation going. If someone reaches out to me in any way, whether that's they, download a lead magnet or sign up for my newsletter or whatever, if I can get one or two more interactions with that person, that's very good for me. So if somebody fills out a scorecard and I write back to them and I say, hey, I noticed that it says 0 in your liquid term. Most people have a checking account. Like, did you enter checking and savings into your liquid term? If they take the time to do that and write me back, that's a win. That means they've shown that they're slightly more interested in having a conversation with me. And it doesn't matter whether that's a lead, a prospect, a client, like anything I can use Elements to, or anytime I can use Elements to push the conversation a little further and have them come back, a little back and forth. It's sort of, they're buying in a little bit more to the idea that like, hey, I'm a person who can help you. Does that make sense? I hope that answers the question.
I think that answered the question. I don't have anything else extra to add. We do have 3 more questions that's come in though. So this is great. We wanted to make this interactive and question based. So please keep sending your questions in.
Cool.
David is curious if maybe you can show maybe a different scorecard. He kind of was curious if you could talk through. I mean, he gave you a little bit more specifics, but I know you've prepared kind of 3 different scorecards.
Yep.
So David, actually, let's come back to that though. Before we move off from this person who's kind of in retirement age, I want to jump down actually to Jay's question, which is like, how would a government pension apply in this scenario here?
Oh, cool.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah, this is a new feature. Oh, I guess I can't update it here, can I, Abby?
You can't. Yeah, we need to fix that. But I think if you go back to the other screen.
If I can go to, let me see, let me just try to get these people pulled up on my dashboard. Give me 1 second.
And if you're not, I'm like, maybe I should share my demo screen and talk through. Should I do that?
No,
Because I have all demo data.
Here we go. So this is what the advisor dashboard looks like for this same client. It's got a summary of that, and it's also got a breakdown of all their accounts. If I click into here to household income, I can add an income source and I can call it pension. And up here, you have a few options for future income, Social Security, annuity, pension. I can say it's 25,000 a year, and I can say that it starts, next year on this date, September 24 next year. Okay, so now I've added that in, and it tweaks guaranteed income is off. So let me turn guaranteed income on, and you'll watch all of the scores. Well, a lot of the scores will update based on that. Did you see that? Did you see the qualified term went up?
It's so fast, you can barely catch it.
Right. If I turn it off, you see that? So this is an option to enter future income and see how it impacts their situation. Now, it is using all present day assumptions, but by turning on that pension of $25,000 a year, their total term just went up to almost 40. And what that means is that
Click into the total term element, because then you can show them the little calculator and you can modify it.
great, great, great. So if I go into this calculator, did you see how initially it said $120,000? Now it says 95. So this calculator just adds in that 25 automatically, and I can turn that on and off to adjust. So that's a way to demonstrate to your clients, like, hey, you're not receiving this pension yet, you're not receiving Social Security yet, you're not receiving this annuity yet. Once you do, this is what it's going to do for your situation.
Yeah, we just basically reduce their spending need, right?
Yeah.
We take the philosophy, and any advisor can modify it however they want in the Elements platform, but we take the philosophy that if you're spending $120,000 before retirement, after retirement, you're likely still going to spend around $120,000, right? And we could debate that all day long, but let's just say that that's what they're going to do. So when they have pensions and Social Security turned on, how we've adjusted that is we just reduce that need, because that income is going to come to them regardless of what their investments do, regardless of anything else. And so as Tim showed you that little calculator, you can turn it on and turn it off to kind of show people easily how that would affect their future income. Yeah, an estimated inheritance. You could
Oh, you can just do other income as well. You can add an other income source. There isn't a specific inheritance, but there is an other. So, you could do that.
that's how
And
that works.
if this isn't clear, all of these bottom row scores, they're an asset class divided by your spending. So anything you do to increase that spending makes these scores lower. Anything you do to decrease your spending makes those scores higher. So that's why turning that on, it changes this from 120K to 95K, which means that net worth is going to stretch a lot further. I hope that makes sense to everyone.
Yeah. Well, that's perfect. One other question asked in the chat. Does it account for the fact that when Social Security or pension income starts, likely the income from work will disappear? The way that you'd factor that in the system is basically that you just would remove those income sources or change them to zero because you're not counting on them anymore. So you just would make
Totally.
those tweaks in the system.
And that reminded me of something. So this client, this demo that became, this fake client that is based on a real client, once they sold that rental property, they no longer had that income. So what I modeled for them was how we needed to use investment income to replace that. So that's when I clicked on other income. I just named it investment income, and I made it the exact amount they were missing from that rental income. So now the burden is on me. They have about $1.7 million from the sale of this income property. Now the burden is on me to invest that money to replace the income they were expecting to get. And that's not necessarily included in the Elements tool, but I also don't feel like it needs to be for them to understand what's going on.
Yeah, totally. One other
Cool.
question that was asked is, like I mentioned earlier, like living off the assets, does that mean we spend them down to zero, or does it allow them to live off invested income? That really what that total term is trying to tell you is outside of like pension, Social Security, those guaranteed income sources, like how much money how many years can you live off of the assets that you have invested, like in your liquid and in your qualified term, right? You could technically even decide, I'm going to sell all my real estate, right, and live off of that. Now, typically people need a place to live, so people don't typically sell all of their real estate, right? So yeah, it's just a rough approximation. We are not in Elements getting down to the minutia into the detail. We're trying to keep things higher level and more simplified so that the end client can understand the scorecard and what everything we're seeing and how it's being modeled as easily as anybody else. And so we're really just saying like, oh, if you spend $120,000 a year and you have, that much in qualified term, you can live for about 7 years if you continue to do that. Now, investments will still grow and taxes will obviously still have to come into play. We are not putting that into elements today because we are trying to just be an easy snapshot at a point in time for them to understand where they're saying. How would you add anything to that, Tim?
Yeah, I would say then, like, the burden of the financial advisor or the financial plan, if you're doing maybe a one-time plan and then letting the client run with it, is to set them up in a way where that qualified term is growing such that, obviously so that it's outpacing inflation, but so that you're setting them up to succeed over the long term. So obviously, in this scenario, if they turned everything into cash today, number one, they'd have a huge tax hit. So I don't want to advocate that they do that, but they'd probably be fine. If they turned everything into cash, they'd probably be able to live off that cash forever. But what I know that this couple would much rather do is leave as much behind to their kids as possible. So now for me as the advisor, this is an ongoing client for me. So the burden on me is, how do I take that money from the sale of their house and invest it so that hopefully that principal is staying more or less the same, and they're able to siphon off some of that investment income or harvest some of those gains so that the total term continues to stay very high. Like if somebody has 10 years of life left or whatever, if somebody's 80 and they think they're going to live to 90 and their total term is 10, they're not going to feel great. So for me as the advisor, the burden is on me to make sure that total term always stays above their life expectancy. And I'm going to reach out. This is another example where I'm going to reach out to a different tool to do those calculations, to model those scenarios. It's not native to Elements to do that modeling, but I don't think it needs to be, because again, like the way I use this is always just to keep the conversation going and help people understand their situation a little better. Cool. So I want to just move on to a
Yeah.
different example. This is
Perfect.
more, I named these people mid-career, 43 and 52. So, not old, not young. And this was a one-time plan client, really just wanted to check in and say, are we doing okay? And so again, this is the scorecard as I found it. Again, I'm not even going to mess around with equity or insurance because I know that those are almost never entered correctly the first time. Something that I love to see is, number one, off the bat, they've got a pretty decent savings rate. 14% is great. I mean, obviously everyone would love to see 20%, but 14% for somebody who's been doing it on their own, managing everything on their own, that's pretty good. And that tells me like, okay, they're committed. They're already taking steps. This is good. This burn is your non-debt spending. And a burn rate of 32%, what that tells me is they have no idea how much they spend. Because at $165 or 165K a year, there's no way they're spending 32% of their income. It's, I don't believe it. So that tells me there's a deeper conversation to be had. We need to look at spending. Debt rate of 5%, that's very good. That's a very low debt rate. Tax rate 0, again, like I don't expect anyone to give me their tax return on the first meeting. If we get to this last row, liquid term, almost 1. For most people, I think having almost a year's worth of cash or, cash equivalents probably feels pretty comfortable, but I would also like to see that get a little higher. Qualified term is pretty low. They own some real estate. They're not business owners, and their total term is 4.9. So that says that their net worth could support them for about 5 years. And while this is not as encouraging or as exciting as those pre-retirees who have a score of basically their life expectancy, this does let me have or let me get to a point where we're having a real conversation much more quickly during a first prospect fit meeting, or even during, one of the first few meetings as a client. And for this couple, I just looking at the scorecard, I don't need to pull out Right Capital's retirement tool to tell them you are not on track. You know, the older one is 52. They've got a total term of 5. They're not there. They need to save a lot more. They need to really get real about some things that don't require Monte Carlo simulation, that don't require me looking, 30 years into the future. So that's one thing, is I can tell them right away, like, you need to, if you want to retire, if you're serious about that, you need to lean into that a lot. Also,
Hey, Tim, real
yeah.
fast, you said something about like, how do you know that they're overspending? Can you just review that one more
Oh
time?
yeah. I'm not saying that they're overspending. I'm saying a burn rate of 32. That means, what this means is their non-debt spending is 32% of their income. And I also happen to know that this family has a young child. I don't believe it.
I
It's
also
just,
like to think like, what's 32% of 165,
yeah,
right? Whatever that number is, that's another way you can kind of determine like, does that
right,
seem right? Right? Like if it
right.
comes out to 2 grand,
Well,
people
if
are likely, especially if they're married and have kids,
yeah,
and in their 40s, probably spending more than like 2 grand a month. So that maybe is another
yeah.
way.
The calculation just below it says spending, and in parentheses less debt, so subtracting debt, basically $53,000 a year. So they're telling me they're spending, somewhere in the range of 4.5K per month. And for two people, they live in the same town I live in. They have a kid who's under 10. I don't buy it. And, I'm not going to call them liars, but I am going to use this as a way to push the conversation along and say, hey, here's your burn rate score. Here's what that means. That seems really low to me. Like, are you using a budgeting app? How did you come up with this number? And unless someone is already using a budgeting app, almost always they just guessed. And so that's not bad, and that's not anything to like slow down your conversation, but it is, to me, it's a red flag, like, hey, we need to look deeper at this. And there's a number of different ways you can do that. You can use a budget tracking tool. I have a simplified version of a spreadsheet that I used based on a different kind of budgeting philosophy. But what that tells me is I need to dig deeper, and I'm probably going to have to pull out another tool to dig deeper. Does that help answer the question, Abby?
I think so. I think that's good. Um,
Cool.
a lot of questions are coming in kind of around like, how does this data get in? How do you trust the
Oh yeah.
data? How do you explain it? Can we like maybe just show them a little bit of what like kind of the onboarding flow is like for a client? I think going over that would be helpful.
Well, I actually don't have that pulled up, to be
Well,
honest.
I can show you how to access it in the platform. So let me teach
Okay.
you something.
Haha.
If you can
Yeah.
just go back to your client tab and click on the people icon on the left, or yeah, hit that back button, either works.
Yeah.
Yeah, go like you're adding a new client. So this is how
Uh-huh.
he'd add a new client if he wanted to. So he goes in, he has a new client, he wants to send them an invite, he'll hit add new client. But if he's ever like, I'm not quite sure I can't remember what the onboarding flow is like, if you hit this preview button down at the very bottom right there,
Okay.
this preview icon basically shows the flow. So whenever you invite a client to Elements, this is what they'll see. They'll actually see like your logo. It'll even say like join Tim on Elements, right? It will put in your own branding. It can be your color and your logo and everything. And then hit that green arrow to the right, Tim. These are all the questions that the client will go through. There's 7 steps. And so each step is just a different part of kind of building their net worth. You can quickly see right here, we ask them about their income, their cash, real estate, debt, spending, business. They can click skip on any of these sections. They can fill out a lot of information or a little bit of information. So we try to keep it really easy and streamlined. We're actually in this stage not even asking clients to connect accounts because we're just trying to keep it really high level and really easy to just get going. Like if they were a prospect, they don't want to spend time connecting everything if they don't even know if they want to work with Tim, right? So that's kind of how the onboarding flow is built out. You'll just see it asks them all these questions. And at the end, it gives them this little scorecard so they can understand. The point of those emojis you were seeing earlier is really for the end client to understand, like once they saw these 11 boxes, to know, right? Like, how am I doing, right? Like that's what the point of these emojis are, is for the end client to understand. Another question came in is like, do clients really understand? How hard is it to explain all of the information here? So Tim, how would you answer that? Like once you share the scorecard with a client, like,
Yeah.
are they overwhelmed? Do you feel like it is helpful? I keep talking about we're trying to keep things easy for a client. Do you feel like that objective is accomplished? Go through that.
Yeah, so I would encourage everyone to take it in stages, and the earlier you are in your engagement, the fewer things I would touch on. So say for example, if somebody submitted this and it's the first time I'm ever talking with them ever, I'm not going to go through everything. What I'm going to do is point out a few things, maybe one or two things that look good, maybe one or two things that I'm confused about, maybe one or two things that I think need attention. So, for example, with this sample client, this demo client, savings rate of 14. I think that's good. I think that says good things about them. I think it says they're taking their money seriously. They want to succeed. They want to do well. I'm going to talk about how I think that's really good and, give them a pat on the back. An area that maybe I have a question about: insurance rate of 45%. That means they have some insurance. And if we look down here, there's a little pop-out bubble. It says one of them has zero, one of them has some. That's an area where I'd be like, hey, I notice you have some insurance. Tell me about that. So this is one, like, tell me a little more information. And then I would point out one thing that I think needs their attention a lot. And in this case, I would point out liquid term, and I would say, like, this isn't bad, but I would love to see that come up a little bit before maybe we get a little more serious about plowing money into retirement accounts. So, it depends on what stage you're at. Also, I think depends a little bit on your clients. I think if you tried to walk them through all of these scorecards all at once, they'd probably get kind of glazed over and forget about it. So, I know one of the themes for the webinar was talking about service calendar. I really like choosing, one of these as like a service calendar focus per month. And you can choose the ones you like or don't like. Not everybody has a business, so maybe don't do a business month, but everybody, you could talk about savings with everyone. You could talk about burn rate, which is spending, with everyone. You could talk about debt with everyone, taxes. So I think kind of rolling it out based on the client, based on how quickly they can process information, and um and relevance to the client. So in this situation, real estate term, they own their house. Great. We don't really need to talk about that. I'm not going to put my energy there.
Awesome. Okay. I know we have about 6 minutes left before we kind of need to wrap up. So any
Cool.
final questions, put them in the chat. Nothing extra. So Tim, if you actually, I know you had one last example you wanted to go through. Do
I
you want to do
did.
that, or do you have like a different thing you want to do?
Well, I did, and this one is kind of like a little bit of a fail, but I also think it's really good. So this is the score that somebody who had a first meeting with me had.
Oh, I
And what do you
love
see?
it.
What do you see
Yes, let's
right
go
away?
over it.
They're youngish. I can't remember. Well, they're not yet clients, so I don't actually know their ages, but they're youngish. And what they told me is that their income is about 56K a year and their spending is about 90K a year. And, unless they're being supplemented by mom and dad, that doesn't make any sense. So what this tells me right away is that there's information missing, and that can seem like kind of a bummer, but it's actually a great way to have the conversation continue. And I mentioned this earlier about like, how do I use this with prospects or whatever? Anything I can do to sort of have a volley of back and forth before I speak to someone is good. That means they're a little more bought in, they're a little more curious, they're a little more invested. So if I come back at them and say like, hey, this is what you told me you earn, but you estimate your spending to be, almost, whatever, not double that, but close to double that. Like, did something get entered wrong? Just that of saying that to someone, it looks like something got entered wrong, help me understand, and having them come back, it's a way for you to show that you're paying attention to them. You're looking at their information, you care, you're getting ready for your meeting. And when they write back or when they update their scorecard, that's them buying in a little bit more to the idea that, you're a trustworthy expert, and they want and they see a reason to continue sharing information with you. So I think a lot of people, I know I definitely felt this way when I started using Elements. Like, people would enter scorecards like this, and I would think like, this is totally useless. It doesn't tell me anything about them. But what it tells me is what information is missing is a conversation that's ready to happen. So liquid term of zero, and this is actually true, liquid term of zero. But when we zoom in on this, they added a checking account, they added a savings account, they added another savings account. Okay, so they do have some money, they just haven't shared it yet. That's an opportunity to move the conversation along. And maybe once they understand what liquid term means, maybe they'll be motivated to share that information.
I love this approach, Tim, that you use. And I think it's so different from what typical advisors and what like the industry I think is the norm, that if they don't come to you with like everything, then it's hard to move it forward. But I think
Yeah,
I love what you're saying of like, they gave me this. It's clearly not filled out. There's not a lot of data here, but let me try to engage with them in some way. And if they actually respond, then they're worth my time to try to keep a conversation going. And I think some people are just testing the market. They're not quite sure. They want to see like, who is this guy? Is he even worth my time to like
totally.
invest in as well? And so I like that it's just a different approach, and maybe even a more approachable way for some who are a little worried and skeptical and scared doing this, new thing, engaging with an advisor. So I think that's smart.
I agree 100%. The audience that I work with, for almost everyone, it's their first time working with an advisor. And so there's a lot of issues with comfort. There's a lot of issues with trust. Like, is this
Yeah.
person, is there a rapport? Are they speaking the same language? And if I can do anything ahead of time, even just to say like, hey, I looked at your information, I paid attention to it, and I noticed this, that's right away, that's demonstrating value. That's showing like, I care about you, even though we've never met.
Yeah.
And I think that resonates with people.
I love that. I love that. So just to wrap things up, I want to be cognizant of time is I think it was really helpful to see, Tim, how you use it, how you go through these scorecards, how do you actually do planning, how do you get people in? There's a lot more to the tool, a lot more to understand. And so if you're interested, I just put another link in the chat. You guys can click on that link and go do a demo. There's plenty more that we didn't even get through today. So feel free to go do a demo, understand, kind of the features and the other things that we have that are available to you to use as advisors. And then if you're interested, like I said, we have those monthly office hours. We even have that community group or section titled Elements within the XYPN. So you can go in there and ask any questions as well. And we're happy to answer any more questions. But those are my final words. Any final words from you, Tim?
No, I'm just going to drop my email address in the chat. If anyone wants to ask me a question, it's totally fine. I love having conversations. I've been using Elements
You're
for a
really
while.
nice.
Yeah, totally. I think it works great for what I do. I'm happy to tell anyone about how I use it. Yeah, I know sometimes people are not comfortable on webinars sharing whatever, so I don't know. Send me an email. I'm happy to answer.
Fantastic. Well, Abby, Tim, thank you both so much for the dialogue and just for joining us today. Abby has to jump to another webinar, so I'm releasing her a little bit early. But to the rest of you who have also just been with us for the past hour, thank you so much for your time and attention. It's always so wonderful to see this kind of interaction and really to see how other advisors are putting into practice the tools that we provide as far as partnerships go. So, and Tim, thank you so much again for just showing us how you use elements, how it's integrated into your practice. This was just so fruitful, and I hope that the rest of you just have so many takeaways as far as the practice management aspect of this goes. And if you are interested, again, in just booking that demo with Elements, please do use that link that Abby had dropped. If you are interested in scheduling a call with an XYPN teammate to learn more about XYPN and our partnerships with Elements, then I am going to also drop a link here for you too. And then, as Tim also graciously gave, his email address is in the chat as well. And last but not least, when you do leave this webinar, there is going to be a feedback survey. We love feedback. We thrive on it. So please fill out so that we know what topics that you're interested in, and just so that we can continue to cater some of this content for you. So that is it for today. Tim, thank you again. Abby, thank you in the universe for joining as well. And then thank you all for just listening. Have a great rest of your day and take care. Bye.